Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Bianca Durrani. I'm president and founder of Aperio Philanthropy. We are a nonprofit fundraising consulting firm created by a group of fundraisers. So naturally, today's event is very exciting for us. We love any opportunity for a conversation. Aperio specializes in relationship-based fundraising with a goal of making it easy for nonprofits to truly thrive, to generate the revenue that they need, not just for what they want to do today, but what they want to do tomorrow as well. And this question of how we develop sustainable, predictable revenue for our future has never been more important for our industry. So we're thrilled to have our illustrious panel here today talking about this important question of resilience and how do we pivot in the wake of COVID to make our organizations not only stay in business, but thrive in the future. We are thrilled to be co-hosting the panel today with NYU, and I'm going to turn it over to Michelle D'Amico.
Great, thanks Bianca. Hi everyone, my name is Michelle D'Amico and I'm the Director for Non-Credit and Public Programs at the NYUSPS Center for Global Affairs, or CGA. Events like this form a part of our efforts to prepare a community of informed global citizens and to create and support positive change. We do this through our 2 graduate programs, an MS in Global Affairs and an MS in Global Conflict, Security, and Cybercrime. We also do this through our non-credit courses and certificates. We are also home to the George H. Heyman Program for Philanthropy and Fundraising. The Heyman Program offers professionals pathways to gain and deepen knowledge and skill sets within the philanthropic sector. Courses are taught by an expert team of faculty practitioners who bring deep insight and knowledge to the classroom. I'm delighted today to introduce you to one of those faculty members, Beth Katznelson, who will be moderating today's conversation. Beth is a long-standing member of the Heyman faculty team and teaches strategies to maximize your annual campaign and currently serves as principal of Contributing Factor Consultancy. Before I turn this over to Beth in today's panel, I'd like to encourage those of you who have questions to use the Q&A tool to submit them to us. We will be recording today's session, and the identities of those who ask questions will be removed from the recording before distribution to our Facebook page. I'll include a link to the page in our chat box. And now, without further ado, I'd like to turn this over to Beth for today's conversation. Go ahead, Beth.
Thank you, Michelle. Thank you, NYU, and thank you, Aperio Philanthropy, for this wonderful opportunity and for organizing this very timely discussion, Pivoting in Practice, Fundraising for Social Justice Organizations. Since the onset of COVID-19, nonprofits have rapidly and creatively pivoted their programs and services over the last few months. And being that we are now months into this work, it's time for us to ask, what does successful pivoting look like? What strategies and plans have worked, and in some cases, what have not? More importantly, an opportunity to share and learn best practices from others in the field is ideal. So I'm delighted to moderate and partner with today's distinguished panelists from organizations around the country, facilitating a conversation, sharing key experiences and advice. I'll now briefly introduce those on today's panel. Classy Alcine, president of KC Common Good. KC Common Good's mission is to create an environment where all citizens can live safely and have access to real opportunities. KC Common Good is addressing the root causes of violence to instill hope and ensure a successful future for every individual in the greater Kansas City region. As a region, they focus on supporting critical needs, including housing support, food insecurity, access to healthcare, and other critical human services. So thank you, Classy. Chandler Bazemore, Senior Development Manager at Outright Action International. Outright International fights for the human rights of LGBTQ people everywhere. Outright works at the international, regional, and national levels to research, document, defend, and advance human rights for LGBTIQ people around the world. Outright is the only LGBTIQ organization that has permanent presence to advocate at the United Nations headquarters in New York for progress for LGBTIQ people. John McCourt, Senior Director of Business Development and Integrated Marketing for GLAAD. For over 30 years, GLAAD has been on the front lines, accelerating acceptance for the LGBTQ community. As a dynamic media force, GLAAD works daily to tackle tough issues, to shape the narrative and provoke dialogue that leads to cultural change. So thank you, John. And Akila Wallace, Executive Director for the Texas Women's Foundation. Through research, advocacy, programs, and grant making, the Texas Women's Foundation works to advance economic and leadership opportunities for women, girls, and families, advancing economic security and leadership. So thank you, Akila. So without further ado, I'd love to begin the conversation with the first question. And we'll start with Classy. So the impact of COVID-19 has required organizations to pivot fundraising methods for donor cultivation and engagement, including leveraging and increasing digital campaign opportunities, moving event-based constituents to mission-based in so many cases, and redirecting in-person meetings and solicitation opportunities to virtual. So as fundraisers, we need to adjust, be creative, and think differently. How have you successfully shifted your approach? What most significant changes would you say you've made in your fundraising strategy?
Yeah, I think like a lot of our job when COVID-19 hit, it was sort of because we are a convening, collaborative organization, it sort of shocked the whole system. And so really had to drift straight quite dramatically. And so we had an amazing budget. I was supposed to hire all these folks. And then I found myself having to cut my budget in half and really go on a shoestring kind of mentality. But it really was all hands on deck. And I have to give it to the Greater Kansas City Foundation community. So a recovery relief fund was created in the tune of $14 million in about 2 weeks. And that went out to a lot of nonprofits doing that everyday work. We were flooded with the homeless population, especially our east side and northeast side of Kansas City, needing PPE needs, and also a lot of that sort of food needs also. And so what we did with a lot of the organizations in the area was almost create like a bi-state coordinated process so we could identify who had resources, how can we get to the people that need them. So our job really had switched from more of awareness and went more into action, which was really exciting. For my fundraising strategy, I really focused on reaching out to the current foundations that were giving to us and saying, hey, could you give a little bit more? You know, we don't have the funds to ask a corporation. We really got closed off to a lot of different things. But I think that we came together as a community and we worked a lot of hours. I almost get emotional thinking about it. When COVID-19 happened, it was the churches and the nonprofits that really stood up in these amazing ways. And so we had to really shift our fundraising to keeping on those ongoing foundation relationships. Thank you.
Thank you, Classy. That, you know, the collaboration and partnership with others has truly been meaningful over the last, always, but specifically over the last few months. So thank you for that. Chandler, do you want to answer that?
Yes, thank you. At Outright, when COVID hit, what we knew, because of one of the pillars of our work, we do research. So we understand the impacts of these crises on the LGBT community, and they are disproportionately impacted during these times of crisis. So we knew that there was going to be an impact to the degree we did not know. But when we found out the degree and to the extent that our communities were being affected, we immediately were able to pivot and change our focus to establish an emergency fund to be a grant-making organization. So we were able to move quickly and to amass donations. And how we were able to do that is that we were very strategic and transparent with our major donors. We had conversations with them, letting them know that this is the impact on the community. This is what we're doing as far as establishing this emergency fund because we want to support the community, but we're also going to need your support to support the fund, but also to support the organization. And I think what that what that was able to show us and what we were able to transform into is a more open dialogue with our major donors, of being fully transparent on our needs and how they play a role in the sustaining of not only the movement, but the organization. And I think our donor base responded favorably to that, to transition from just a donor to a stakeholder, to a decision maker. They're involved in the process. So that's one way that we were able to pivot during COVID to help our fundraising. The other was to establish ourselves in the space of corporate philanthropy, because as we were having the conversations, the corporate sector wanted to be involved, but they had no idea what they were going to do. As most organizations did during COVID, we want to do something, we don't know what to do. So we were able to be creative and to establish ourselves as a stakeholder, a policy leader, and a thought leader in this area so that we could provide a service to corporations. And they were able to then utilize us to understand what was happening on the ground in country affecting communities. And that way we could leverage that support so that they could make an impact and have a positive impact on COVID funding. So we were able to establish ourselves not only as thought leaders, being able to find out what's going on, being able to share how it's being impacted in communities, but also be able to mobilize corporations, individuals to affect change. So that was one thing. So I think the big thing is transparency, understanding your organization's strengths, and we were able to bring our strengths with our knowledge of our community, but also the knowledge of how we can make those linkages and those connections and those partnerships be effective.
I love that, Chandler, especially further educating your major donors to further having them become deepening their investment and more, better understanding the work to strengthen their support. And that's become really important most recently. So thank you. John.
Hey, thank you so much for having me today. One of the biggest pivots we did pretty immediately was move to remote work, which affected more than just our fundraising strategies at GLAAD, but also our programmatic work as well. I'm actually very, very grateful for the fact that as a LGBTQ media advocacy organization, we could pivot pretty seamlessly to work remote while we were sheltering in place. However, timing wasn't necessarily always on our side, whereas when the seriousness of COVID started to really unravel in New York City, it was literally just days before one of our biggest fundraising events of the year. The GLAAD Media Awards was supposed to be held in New York on March 19th. And it's our biggest fundraiser, not just for corporate partners, but also individual table buys and major donors, and also helps bring awareness to GLAAD's work with LGBTQ representation in all forms of media. So facing that really big cancellation, we were in a world of hurt. And thankfully, I work with some amazing fundraisers, and we were able to start calling pretty immediately, especially as the seriousness of COVID started to really unfold, and we realized that this wasn't just a few-week pause. This was a pivotal lifestyle change for every industry. And so we really reached out to all of our corporate partners, individual ticket buyers, and major donors who were planning to attend the awards or sponsor them, and highly encouraged them to convert their table buys or sponsorship packages into donations for the organizations. And so very similar, I love what Chandler said about approaching them as stakeholders and getting them to understand that, yes, your gift was meant to be for this particular event, but now that that's not happening, GLAAD's work is still really, really important. So that was one of the biggest first pivots we made. And then again, as we started to realize how long lasting the shutdowns would be, my mind went immediately to Pride. And LGBTQ Pride Month is often one of the biggest times where my business development and corporate partners are able to engage with the community as well as fundraise for GLAAD. And so with the parades being canceled, with festivals going online, we knew that we had to produce something never done before to still have our community be able to honor Pride, and our corporate partners who wanted to work with us fund that. And so we actually created this first ever Pride Box mailer kit through a partnership with a great brand called BabbleBox. I actually have one here. You can see an example we produced this giant Pride box that we were able to get 18 of our corporate partners to provide gifts or promos in so that we could send to our community members, talent, and media network so that they could understand that GLAAD is giving you an opportunity to still honor your pride and showcase your pride, even if you're sheltering in place. Anything from a pride flag window cling to merch from our partners, we really appreciated that, and it made quite an impact. And we also were able to leverage that as a bonus for incentivized giving for individual givers, to allow, basically, in order to get the box, you were to make a monthly gift of $19. So not only did we get corporate sponsorships of the box program itself, but also we're able to use it for individual giving to sustain the organization for months and years to come. So I think those, between the GLAAD Media Awards and our Pride box, were some of the most creative and new pivots we had to make so far.
Thank you. Innovation and creativity are absolutely applauded, and congratulations on the success of that, because they're really impressive. So thank you. Akila.
Yes. Well, first, thank you, NYU and Imperial Philanthropy, for this opportunity to elevate the importance of fundraising for social justice organizations. I'm also grateful for my previous work and current affiliation with Texas Women's Foundation, who is the fiscal sponsor of Heritage Giving Fund, a Black Women's Giving Circle I founded. However, as the Executive Director of Faith in Texas, to answer this question, I have to start by recognizing my amazing organizing and communication team for their quick actions to mobilize thousands of community members here in North Texas, who immediately issued calls to action for local and county officials to establish a moratorium on all evictions and utility shutoffs. We knew to prioritize this need because we were preparing to launch a Just Housing campaign right before COVID-19 hit. And luckily, within a month of our ordinance, within a month of us making these calls, the ordinance was passed. And everyone in the community knew that Faith in Texas, along with our partners, were instrumental in keeping vulnerable families safe in their homes. The threat of not being able to pay rent or mortgage was a concern of not only low income, but also middle class working families. And this caught vast audience's attention and presented a strong case for support from local foundations, small businesses, and corporations, many who never or rarely invest in social justice, but they made first-time unrestricted grants to us in the early months of COVID-19. Additionally, we had launched our Luke 418 Bail Fund just on May 1, which positioned us to receive significant support from over 6,000 new individual donors once the protests broke out here in Dallas and across the nation. It's also important to note that one significant change to our fundraising strategy was the decision not to solicit annual covenant partner dues from congregations we provide organizing training for. Literally, again, the week before stay-at-home orders were issued, we were preparing to drop solicitation letters to clergy, those who are organizing with us. However, in covenant partner dues have historically been our second highest revenue stream. But instead, we focused on increasing our clergy organizing efforts to hear the concerns of pastors, priests, rabbis, and imams so that we could support them and their congregants. Eventually, as more mega and more affluent congregations became involved with us, we were able to ask them if they would sow seeds that would help us to continue to organize smaller congregations in lower income communities. Additionally, some of the gifts that congregations had an interest in supporting, and those who had the capacity to, were made to support our bail fund because it was able to align with their prison outreach ministry. So I'm just grateful for my team and the ways that we were able to present a really strong case for grassroots organizing and the work that we do and the impact that we have, so that it did change the narrative and ensure that social justice organizations were, considered just as necessary as many of our direct services organizations.
Thank you, Akila. I think also, again, reaching out to the community and supporters served as a priority, and that was truly apparent, and that's becoming more and more apparent as we move forward. So thank you. I'd like to move on to question 2. And I think this time we'll start with Akila since we're here, and we'll go in the other direction. So as organizations work to develop these innovative plans to pivot during these challenging times, long-term sustainability is critical. And many social justice organizations and advocacy-focused organizations, like you've just shared, are actually experiencing increased awareness and spikes in their campaigns due to raised awareness. So what plans do you find have worked or can work in long-term sustainability, ensuring that the current climate of heightened awareness and support around social justice organizations and advocacy causes don't become just another trend?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And this concern that racial and social justice will lose its mass appeal often crosses my mind. But thanks to public-facing platforms like this and our scaled-up investment in mass communications, I'm experiencing a significant increase in opportunities to have private conversations with philanthropic leaders, including corporations and major individual donors who weren't easily persuaded to invest in advocacy and policy change before, often because they shied away from politics per se. It's also important to note that for the first time in my 4 years with Faith in Texas, I was in a position where people were seeking us out versus us having to invest countless hours in trying to do donor searches and really figure out who are the progressive funders locally, regionally, and across the nation who are not only investing in us, but making sizable gifts to ensure that we were able to do significant work and scale up as well. However, I don't take it lightly I also have the attention of the donor community, because I know priorities and can and will likely change one day. So I was able to launch an intimate donor series where I extended personal invitations to our existing and prospective major donors. We continue to have this as a recurring virtual meeting where I share the impact of grassroots organizing in response to COVID-19 and in regard to pressing social justice issues. Just last month, we had a session that featured a local wealthy businessman who shared what led his white Jewish family to attend a Faith in Texas March for Black Lives this summer. Feedback from the donors who participated in this intimate discussion was great, and it presented the opportunity for me to invite them to become sustaining donors, and ensuring that we're working towards not just a one-time gift, but how are you continuing to make lasting gifts. And then also I made sure to use my influence in the philanthropic sector, thanks to my work with Heritage Giving Fund, a Black Women's Giving Circle, to help produce access to other social justice partners, because what I do know is that in order for Faith in Texas to sustain beyond this moment, the entire ecosystem must exist as well. So I'm making sure that other organizations get introductions and are receiving funding, so that ultimately we have a strong case for why all of us need to maintain for the long run.
Outstanding. So properly engaging and cultivating those new prospects and finding ways to keep them engaged as they're coming through. That's fantastic. Thank you. John? Do you want to answer this question?
Of course, and I'm so glad that you asked this question, because the social justice or advocacy as trendy has been something that, from an LGBTQ perspective, we've been quite focused on for some time, and it's really been exacerbated this year for obvious reasons. But yeah, I've worked in the queer media space for the past 8+ years, and I noticed a pretty distinct shift from a pre-marriage equality prior to 2015 to post-marriage equality, how brands and corporations would engage with the LGBTQ community around specifically June for Pride Month. And what has become the term is rainbow market or rainbow capitalism or pink washing, where brands show up only in the month of June to represent and support the LGBTQ community, but often in very superficial ways, like the parades and so forth that I mentioned previously, but not actually continue to sustain that support, whether it's through donations to LGBTQ nonprofits or just authentic representation of queer, trans stories. And so we've been aware of this for quite some time. So despite obviously needing to produce something for Pride, like that box, we wanted to continue to impress upon our corporate partners, or at least as my role, to make sure that they were empowered with other opportunities and heavily encouraged to represent and speak out on the issues that affect LGBTQ people year round. Today is actually a perfect example of that. So today's Spirit Day. It's GLAAD's campaign that's in its 11th year that shows support for LGBTQ youth by asking the world to wear purple. Go purple, whether you're a person, a landmark, a teacher, a student. We have Zoom backgrounds this year. Anything, purple is the color in the rainbow flag that represents spirit, and it's a sign of support for queer youth that disproportionately face bullying, and in these days, online bullying and harassment. And so this is a great opportunity for corporations to engage and focus on an issue-specific topic within the LGBTQ community. But not stopping there, October is also LGBTQ History Month, which does not get nearly as much applause or attention as, say, Pride Month. And so similar to Akila, we actually hosted with our CEO and our GLAAD Media Institute and myself a corporate summit on October 1st to really just educate and empower our corporate donors on other opportunities to engage with the community and support GLAAD. There's Trans Day of Visibility on March 31st. There's also a really big encouragement just to focus on LGBTQ issues beyond these digital awareness days, but really just trying to impress upon the need to think broader than Pride Month, which can also be often be the trendiest thing to do, but not necessarily the most impactful.
That's fantastic. Creating opportunities is really key, and I love that. Thank you. Classy.
I really love this question. I was thinking about a lot of things that we are doing here, and I think that social justice nonprofits have to be a lot more bold around multi-year giving. And so what I've been doing consciously is looking at corporate and foundations who are sort of shifting and really focusing on social justice and making it very clear that's not an issue we can solve overnight. Like, people just assume, if we put in $100 million more, if we get 1,000 more police, all of a sudden all these issues of social justice and crime will decrease. But I always say that our community owns every single thing that happens. And so I've really been focused working with the Greater Kansas City Chamber of Commerce of what is a civically engaged corporation. And a lot of the issue is that folks may support Black Lives Matter, folks may understand social justice issues, but because it is such a personal internal work, it is our job around social justice to educate the public in these really massive multi-channel ways. And so we hold events that are virtual with the community almost on a monthly basis, talking around mental health, all of those contributing factors. In Kansas City, we're dealing with affordable housing issues. And it doesn't shock me. A lot of people just don't know. And it's hard with COVID-19. Everyone sort of went to this online platform, or they're watching the news. And so they're not really getting those local issues addressed. And I think that we're doing a great job around that. So I'm a big believer in really talking about how can you support us for 5 years. The 1 year conversation, I'm not having those. Because if we really want to see shifts and incremental changes, I need to know for 5 years I can do my job effectively.
Absolutely. Investment, getting people really invested. Absolutely. Chandler.
Yes, I think what Outright learned through this COVID experience is we learned a deeper appreciation for engaging and communicating to our donors. What we found is that there was such a positive response to their inclusion in what is going on. So building on that, we have decided to strengthen and heighten our communication and using some of the technology. As we all know, as we're on this Zoom call now, we've utilized Zoom a lot more. For our major donors, we have initiated a new diplomats dialogue circle where quarterly we'll have these deeper conversations about what's going on in the community, about what's going on within the organization, to give our major donors that added incentive to stay engaged, but engaged in a different way as a stakeholder. When we set up the fund, we got a lot of new donors, a lot of first-time donors, because they were responding to the need of the fund. So we want to create an opportunity to engage them and turn them into long-term donors or monthly donors or sustainers. So what we're doing, and actually the first one is coming up next month, we decided to hold quarterly a Outright 101 half-hour webinar. For all of our new donors who really don't know the organization that well, we want to give them the opportunity to learn a little bit more. So this webinar, this presentation is going to give them a little bit more insight to the organization and different ways for them to get involved. So I think our takeaway from this COVID experience is engagement and conversation and touch points, they really matter. And we need to create more of them and facilitate more space to have the dialogue to bring people in closer, because people respond to the things that they're passionate about. So if they can learn more about the organization, they can find something to have a touchstone with the work that we're doing. That's a donor that we can keep for the long term. And as Classy mentioned, we're having these conversations about long-term support. So we don't want a donor to come in and give just once. We understand that that's going to happen, yes, but we want to build sustaining relationships where they can grow with us, where they start out as a donor who gave $50 to an emergency fund for COVID relief, but during the course of our relationship and the course of our progression with them, they learn more about the organization, they become more invested in the organization, and they become an ambassador for the organization and help us to fundraise and bring other people into the circle to learn more about us. So I think one of the learning experiences that we learned is that engagement, communication, those things matter, and we really need to build on those.
Thank you. So talking about communication and engaging your donors, donors have many different competing interests and different things coming at them at once. So as you're navigating those competing interests, and often, and in many cases, influential distractions that might impact a donor to either give or not give to your organization, that's often a challenge that organizations face. So as we approach a climate of year-end giving, potential donor fatigue, an upcoming election, what are some strategies that you have found to be successful as you navigate this time of year, and to maintain your donor engagement and support? Chandler, you can take that.
Okay. I think during this time, we're very focused on the story. We're very focused on what we want to say in this moment in regards to our work. So we're in the process now of developing those end of year touch points and those conversation points, those appeal points. So really it's a matter of understanding what the climate looks like and being very true and focused on what we are asking for. How do we want people to support? What do we want people to support? So the language around what is important to the organization and our future is really important and key. We are unique in the sense that this is our 30th anniversary. So a lot of our language is really going to be about how proud we are of the successes of the past 30 years, but what is our vision for the next 30 years? What do we want to see in the next 30 years? And that's really shaping many of our conversations. It's shaping our conversations about people's long-term giving. We have launched our legacy circle for planned giving. So it's really about what is the vision of the next 30 years that you want to see. It's about developing those talking points in that language and positioning ourselves so that our donors know what is our vision for the future and how they are a part of that and how they can be involved in that. So as we go into this end of year season, it's really about language. It's about positioning, and it's about stating your case and building that level of support.
Thank you. Classy, your thoughts?
Yeah, I was thinking a lot about tell me your story. So tell me more about what inspires you. How does crime impact your life? And I think being a new nonprofit around social entrepreneurship and social justice, a lot of our job is going to be focusing on telling our story. And I have really focused, I like that there was a mention around media and sort of those 30-second social media clips that, you know, really have a great image around them and really talk around how all these contributing factors impact our community. But something that came up to me on maintaining sort of that donor support and engagement is that our donors want to also see us with media. And so we have partnered with Fox 4 and many others to really tell our story. And we had a really successful event a couple months ago with the mayor of Kansas City, Mayor Lucas, and Wesley Hamilton, you know, around how are we addressing mental health for our young people during the summer. The event was extremely successful, had thousands of views. And then we just continue to work sort of our local social media folks to get the word out. I went on another level, and I encourage nonprofits to focus on writing lots of op-ed pieces. We did an amazing piece around everyone is sheltered in place. So domestic violence is happening within our homes. We've seen a dramatic drop in calls around child abuse. And then we're also seeing this about a 30% increase in homelessness. So really talking about this being a crisis, because I think that some people are removed from what's happening. And I think a lot of our job is to share these stories. You know, if you're a two-parent household and one parent's lost a job, the mental health, the emotional stress of that is damaging. And I think it is our job to write as much as we can, not only have the image and have the media, but also have those hard-hitting conversations about what can you do as an agent of your community. If you see something, say something. You know, I always think about, you know, get in that good trouble and make sure that you can create these safe spaces so people can approach you. If you see something weird happen, speak up, because we have too many people that don't have that support system that we assumed. But with social media, so many folks are removed from reality in many ways. And so it's really our job to educate and tell that story of what if this was you, and let folks know that this is you, this is our community, these are our children, and we need to be supporting us all.
Yeah, continuing to raise awareness is absolutely important. Okay, I think we're going to ask our last question, and then we're going to be heading to Q&A shortly. So with COVID, COVID-19 has had a significant impact on the nonprofit sector as a whole. The cancellation of critical programming and fundraising events, restructuring and decreasing professional resources for many, budget and campaign impact, working from home for some indefinitely, moving to virtual events and programming, and so much more. So how do you envision the philanthropic landscape adapting as we move forward? And I'm going to turn this to Akila.
Yeah, so my hope is that more donors will see the value in investing in policy change while also investing in direct services. Because if they're truly interested in eradicating poverty, seeking equity for Black and Brown people, leadership development for women and girls, and on, we have to invest in systemic change, and at every level within our government, business communities, educational systems, and the environment. Also, look, fundraising events as we knew them are out of the question for the foreseeable future. Although my heart aches for the small businesses who benefited from providing catering, flowers, decorations, and AV at in-person events, I envision a ripple effect where philanthropies drastically increase their investment in social justice organizations. Then decision makers are elevated who prioritize directly impacted community members, which then results in policies that are shaped to better meet their needs. For example, everyone finally earns a livable wage. Blacks are no longer over-policed, and immigrants are welcomed versus being put in cages. Then all of our families can care for themselves, neighbors, and greater society. And then finally, everyone experiences their full liberation, and the need to invest in direct social services drastically decrease or eventually go away altogether. That sums up my happy fairy tale. That's how I see it.
Very good, thank you. John, do you want to answer some of that?
Sure, of course. And obviously being in business development, I always look at these things from a corporate perspective. And I have to admit that I feel like corporate philanthropy, I'm a bit optimistic for the future of it, really based off everything that's happened this year, not just COVID-19, but the racial injustice and police brutality has really caused what I would say is a corporate reckoning within organizations and media companies and employees. People are emboldened to speak up about the issues that matter to them. And so what I've just noticed anecdotally, really since the spring and the early summer, is that we're getting a lot more conversations with diversity, equity, and inclusion teams who are now being more empowered than ever before, or even employee resource groups for LGBTQ or other marginalized identities within organizations now have a seat at the table where they might not have had previously. And that's amazing, and it needs to continue. But I'm also noticing those internal resources and workforce organizations are also partnering with their social impact or corporate social responsibility initiative. So it's also representing these issues, not just from a workforce perspective, but out into the wider community. So I think in the long term, this is a really good thing, and we're going to see brands adapting to really meet this moment. I hope they continue to do so, especially because modern day consumers, whether it's millennials or even Gen Z, they want to see corporations and organizations standing by and representing the issues they care about, specifically progressive issues. So even though there is a lot of economic uncertainties right now in this very moment, and we still don't know the path of this virus and how long it will sustain, in the long term, I'm optimistic that when it comes to corporate philanthropy, we're going to see larger investments in the future.
Absolutely, I do hope so as well. Chandler, do you want to take a stab at this question before I move on?
Sure. I think, and this is building off of what Akila said, is that the landscape has truly changed, and we as development and not in the nonprofit world need to adjust and understand that business as usual is no longer that. That we must all be nimble and rise to the challenge of things looking different and executing things in a different way. So whether that is everyone working from home and working remotely, or not being able to rely on tried and true fundraisers such as in-person events and those type of things, we need to be creative and think about how we are going to not only sustain our organizations, but thrive and grow. Because the issues are still there, the work is still there. We need to rise to the challenge of designing what this new landscape is going to look like. And I think part of it also is on the organization, that what I've seen as far as the trend here, especially in the States, is that we can no longer ignore other movements. So the social justice movement really occupied a lot of space this summer and continues to occupy a lot of space. So I think organizations are going to have to reconcile and be able to adjust and address other issues, because I think gone is the time where we can kind of stay in our own lane. We have to understand that it's very much intertwined and it's very comprehensive, so that we need to address what is going on within the community, even though it might not affect our work. So I think there's a lot of adjustments that need to happen. And I think one thing that I love about our community is that we're resilient, we're creative, and I know that we'll rise to the challenge and be able to kind of figure out this new way of existing.
I couldn't agree more. And I think all of the creativity, innovation, and pivoting that each of you have demonstrated through this conversation shows exactly that. So I want to thank each of you. I want to ask one more question to each of you. Through all of this, maintaining positivity and identifying some silver lining, I at least have experienced to be helpful. And so I ask, what advice or silver lining would you share with those listening that you have found as you've navigated this new climate to have been helpful? And would you share as your advice to others? Let's start with Chandler.
I would say what has been one area to help me keep my sanity through all of this has been my coworkers, to really rely on the team and understand that we're in this together. There are moments where we are frustrated. There are moments where we are happy. There are moments where we lean on one another. So I think it's to get through this is to really appreciate the support system that you have and your coworkers, and to really rely on them and lean on them and learn from them. Because one thing at Outright is that we have an international staff, so a lot of them are working remotely. It really impacted the New York staff because we didn't have an office to go to. So we all transitioned to working remotely, and you know, it was a transition. So understand and appreciate your coworkers, because they are going to be your lifeblood and your salvation in times.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Classy?
Wow, I love this question. I kept thinking about my great-grandmother, and she would always say that many hands make for light work. And what inspires me, what gets me through every day is a lot about hope. And it's a lot about, you know, understanding that the stakes are extremely high, but we can be co-owners in the solution. And so it's time to be bold. It's time to demand action. It's time to stop sitting around and being a bystander on issues. And so I think seeing more collaboration, breaking down the silos within these different parties, whether it's the business community or even the clergy community, to all these different folks. And, you know, speaking up and being as honest as you can, even if people don't like your response. And I think that takes a sense of having lots of faith, and also having lots of understanding and having an empathetic ear to know that we have so many people that are suffering. And something that always makes me speak up is listening to those softest voices. And if I can be the advocate, I'm going to fight every single day, because our young people are watching this, and this is the example we want them to see. And I always say they're a small percentage of our population now, but they're 100% of our future. And so what inspires me, and I hope everyone on this call, is we have to think about the vision of our city and our region and our country. And if you keep thinking about that vision and you determine what it wants to be, let's get together and let's work together and really fight and be bold and stand in justice.
Absolutely. And, you know, being fundraisers and those in the not-for-profit community and philanthropic sector, our jobs are to make things better and have that optimistic outlook. And so that's exactly it. And having that positive view of how we're going to improve and raise awareness is how we're going to do it. So that statement is perfect. So thank you. I'm going to add another question that has come in. So I'm going to turn this to John. And John, if you want to intertwine an answer to the previous question as well as this new question, you know, go for it. But this new question is, what failures might have you had early on, and how did you learn from it?
Amazing. So thank you so much. To the previous question, the silver lining that I really see is creativity, and creativity across all industries, because it's been forced of us. I'm not a history buff, but I thought I heard something that the Renaissance was actually took place directly after the plague. And I think what we're experiencing is people needing to adapt by necessity, whether it's something as small as a pride box, or even that GLAAD Awards that I mentioned, which was canceled, the brick and mortar event. We actually ended up producing a digital virtual only version of it in July. And because of that, it was more accessible through our social media partners and our broadcast partners. The message that we would have done at 2 events in New York and Los Angeles was seen by many more people around the world. So it's creative things like that that keep me going. And advice I would want to share is to not be afraid to ask for help. because we are a community within the LGBTQ perspective, within the social justice and advocacy perspective. And it's really okay, especially in this time, to admit that we're a bit lost or uncertain how to reach our fundraising goals or whatnot. So even events like this are resources, and I hope that people are not afraid to ask for help when needed. And when it comes to failures, I guess one thing I want to admit is that for every success we've had, like the Pride Box, for instance, there have been many others that we've pitched out to corporate partners for sponsorships or funds for major donors or individual giving that have not gone as successfully, or certain sponsorships that we wanted to create for different digital awareness days like Bi Week and so forth. We're still going to work on those and really impress the need to support the community year round. But just because you see headlines of success from one particular initiative, there's usually a few that have been a lot of work from really talented people that didn't quite get the same attention that they deserved.
Excellent, thank you. Chandler, I'm actually going to turn this question to you. You had spoken earlier about engaging the community and partnerships. And so this question is, how are you utilizing volunteers in different ways than perhaps you did previously?
Yes, one way that we engaged volunteers differently or anew is because this new opportunity presented to us. For our emergency fund, there was a grant review process. So we asked our corporate community and we asked some of our donors to help review applications. And so that was one way we were able to amass and organize over 200 volunteers to be able to be engaged in the process. And those were people, as far as the theme of deeper engagement and creating these opportunities for people to become stakeholders and to deepen their investment in the organization. That was a very critical and impactful opportunity, because here we have people who are interested and have supported the organization. They're reading these heartbreaking stories about how communities were impacted by COVID, where we think of, I won't be able to afford my rent for 4 months. And if you think about a New York rent, that could be $4,000 or $8,000. Where people were submitting grant reports for, I need $50, that will be able to pay for my rent for 4 months. Besides that being just incomprehensible in New York, just a little amount of money, but understanding the need, understanding the desperation, understanding that you're part of the solution, that you're part of the process. That impact is immeasurable for our donor base and our volunteer base. So creating innovative and new opportunities to engage volunteers is definitely a benefit. And to open up that dialogue, find out what your volunteers want to do. There could be opportunities that you haven't thought of or that you haven't considered that a volunteer say, well, I can offer this, or why don't you think about doing that? So opening up that dialogue, you learn so much by asking questions.
Absolutely. Does anyone else want to share outreach or engagement with volunteers before we move on into a different question? Okay. Classy, I'm actually going to share this question. You discussed multi-year asks and giving. Can you talk more about asking donors for multi-year investments? How do you possibly start those conversations? Are they with existing donors?
A lot of them are with existing donors that we currently work with, but what I do, a lot of my job is the vision, right? We want a safe community. We want kids to be able to get an education, and for them to understand to do that, we need X amount of funds over the next 5 years to support all of this work. And what's really unique around KC Common Good is that we don't provide the direct care service itself, because we see the assets in our community. How do we uplift and amplify them? So our budget in general is quite small, but the pilots will require millions of funds. And so what I'm trying to get them to understand is, with this investment, you're helping to reach thousands of people who otherwise would never have this opportunity. And so I've been setting up on a weekly basis. I talk to at least one funder a week. And I talk to them a lot about this is the progress we've been having the last 2 months, and keeping them engaged, I think, is critical. But I was on a call with the Obama Foundation back in June, and one of the large foundations in the country said, we're shifting our focus on multi-year giving because these issues are so multi-layered, that we're gonna have to help people with food, we're gonna have to help people with that additional case management needs. We have a project right now with the Department of Corrections and building a career campus on a prison, which is mind-blowing, right? But the whole idea around that is that we cannot continue to see a 50% recidivism rate when we know people are just looking for an opportunity, they're looking for a job, and what barriers can work from a policy point of view and also from a social point of view too.
Thank you. This question is actually for everyone. How do you pivot your fundraising budget for 2021, 2022 with so many unknowns still in play? Could you talk more about personalizing your conversations with potential donors without having to have in-person meetings right now? So it's a bit of a two-person question. I guess let's start with Chandler.
Yeah, I wanted to, I'm happy to answer this question too, but I wanted to build off a little bit of what Classy was saying as far as the importance of having the conversations about long-term support and multi-year support. As Classy mentioned, one of the things that we in development and fundraising are finding is that the conversations are from our institutional partners, we're shifting priority, we're shifting focus. It might have been a shift to COVID. Now it's going to be more of a shift to social justice work. So those conversations with our individual donors about their support and multi-year support are important now more so than ever. So you need to start having those conversations. And it could be in the context of, as you're talking about your budget for 2021 or 2022, how the impact, how this COVID has really impacted many nonprofits, and we are looking at shrinking funding pools. So they're very important, and that's why you need to have those conversations for that preparation for your 2021 and 2022 budget, so that you can understand and make projections about what's coming in. So really, it's the proactive conversation with your individual donors about the landscape and about the threats that you have and the fragility of the budget if your organization is in that position, to be able to have those frank conversations, because people will respond to your ask. And as my mother said, a closed mouth doesn't get fed. So if you're not going to ask the question, if you're not going to ask for it, you're not going to receive it. So be able to really to be able to articulate your needs and be able to share that far and wide.
Absolutely. Akila, did you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I just wanted to, share that, I'm grateful for our new development director who's going to be joining my team on Monday. And so I'm planning a really aggressive campaign to convert 20 to 30% of our 6,000 new donors into recurring donors at given levels that will range from $10 to $250 per month. I really want to dramatically shift the percentage of our revenue streams that come from individuals to better reflect the diversity of Texas.
Thank you. I think we may have time for one more question. What role would you say that self-care plays in your social justice work and the well-being of your colleagues and your staff? Classy, I'm going to turn this to you. Begin.
I love this question. So when I'm not doing this work, I'm actually a meditation instructor. So I'm constantly, I always remind people that if we're not doing good, no one's doing good. And that goes for our staff too. And so I always encourage folks at least once a month, take one Friday off. I don't even care if you want to lay in bed all day and watch Netflix, whatever brings you joy with ice cream and macaroni and cheese, whatever you want to do. But really encouraging people to touch with and find within themselves, is there any moments that you're feeling stressed out? Pause for a moment. You don't have to respond to everything. And what's hard with being online is that folks feel like, oh, I got an email, I have to respond right now. I got a text, I have to respond right now. If something's really emotional and you feel like you're going to respond from a space of anger or frustration, give it 24 hours. It's okay. Life will still go on. People will still do what they do. And I always like to tell my staff is there's a really great app called Shine, and it really helps with mindfulness and meditation on a daily basis. It's 5 minutes long. I do it every single morning. And that just helps you to refocus and shift all of those emotional states. But take a long, deep breath, turn off your computer for 20 minutes, just have a moment to chill out and then refocus.
Thank you. That is outstanding advice, and I plan to take that advice myself. So thank you very much. And thank you to everyone. Thank you to all of our fantastic panelists. Again, to NYU, Michelle, and to Apiro Philanthropy. And now I'm going to turn it back over to Bianca at Apiro. Thank you.
Thank you, Beth. And I so enjoyed the conversation today. Thank you all for sharing your experiences and your lessons learned. I know I took a lot of notes and I have a lot of ideas to pass along. Michelle put in the chat our links to an event next week that's going to focus on a similar conversation with the leaders from the arts and culture organizations. And if you missed our first one that was focused on healthcare, the link is in the chat there as well to the recording. We'll be sure to send the recording of this one out shortly after this call concludes, so you can revisit your favorite points made by this excellent panel. Thank you, everyone. Have a great afternoon.